To create a storage space, you need multiple physical drives connected to your server. Now, we're using virtual machines, but I can still simulate that. What I'm going to do is actually shut down my virtual machine. And that's going to just completely power down that virtual machine. That'll take just a moment to power off. So that is completely powered off. Now I'm going to go to settings of the virtual machine itself, and I have this hard drive option that shows up. So right now I just have one hard drive connected to my server, this RTS-DC1 VHDX. Well, what I can do is go to add hardware, and I'm going to add a SCSI controller. So when I click add, hard drive is an option here. That's what I want. So I'm going to click add. I'm going to click new. And now it gives me this new virtual hard disk wizard. I'm just going to click next, and I'm going to make this a dynamically expanding. That's the default. And I'm going to name this disk 01. And we'll click next. I'm going to leave it on the default size of 127 gigabytes. That's fine. And I'll click finished. Now I'm going to do the same thing again. SCSI controller, add, hard drive, add, and I'm just going to click through the wizard, and this time I'm going to name it disk 02. Next. We're going to leave everything on the default, and I'll just click finish. So now I have 2 additional drives on my machine. So I have the hard drive itself that contains the operating system. Then I have disk 01, disk 02. Well, I'm going to click OK on that. And I'm going to start the virtual machine back up. Now, what that actually simulates, it's the equivalent of you buying a brand new computer, shutting it down, adding 2 hard drives to it, then you power it back up, and both of those hard drives now show up on your server. Now that we're powered back up, I'm going to log in as administrator. The first thing we're going to do is look to see these hard drives. I'm just going to right click on start, and I'm going to go to computer management. Now you could choose disk management, it would show you the same view. I just always prefer to go to computer management. In computer management, I'm going to click disk management. And now you'll see disk 1 shows up and disk 2. Now both are unknown offline, but I'm not doing anything to those disks. Now if I wanted to use them comparable to how I use disk 0, you could bring the disk online. Then you could format it and you could use it like any other drive. We don't want to do that. What I want to do is actually add my storage pool. I'm going to close my computer management here. To add the storage pool, in Server Manager, you always have file and storage services in the list. It's always present by default. No role or feature has to be installed for that to show up. Once you expand that, you'll see storage pools show up. The way this basically works, we are going to start with physical disks, then we're going to create a storage pool, and then we're going to go to virtual disks. So almost like a big loop. Now, your storage pool can never contain the operating system disk. The operating system disk will never show up here under physical disks that are available to be used for your pool. So that's not even an option. Only additional drives show up. So what I'm going to do is create a new storage pool. And this, before you begin, many of these wizards give us useful information on the first screen. But this one says this will help you group physical disks into a storage pool, enabling you to make more efficient use of disk capacity. After creating a storage pool, you can use space in the pool to create volumes on virtual disks, which appear as normal disks to the operating system. So what that is saying in a nutshell is we can combine space from all these drives and then make it appear like a single drive to the operating system. That's what we want. So I'm just going to click next here. I'm going to name this pool 1. You can name it anything. And I'll just click next. These are the 2 virtual disks we added. Now you have to, at a minimum, just have 1 disk. So if I had 5 disks, all 5 would show up here, and you could select as many of those as you want to be part of your storage pool. I'm going to choose both disks. Each of those disks is 127 gigabytes. So that's a total of 254 gigabytes of space. I'll click next for that, and we will create. Our storage pool is now created. Now, what you can do is select this create a virtual disk when this wizard closes, and it's going to just pull up the next screen you need for the configuration. But I'm actually going to just clear that and click close. So this is the storage pool we just created. Now do notice the capacity is slightly smaller. So it has 252 gigs of free space. Some other space is used to store like configuration settings and other things. So it is never equal to the exact amount of space that you defined. But what I want to do is create a new virtual disk. So when I right click that, new virtual disk, now I'm going to select my pool 1. Now you could have more than 1 storage pool. I added 2 disks to this. If I go back to this server and add a couple more disks, I could then create another storage pool on the server if I wanted to. Or you could add those additional disks to this storage pool I already have. That would be our option. But I'm going to select my only pool, pool 1, and I'm going to choose OK. Now we get this new virtual disk wizard. Now this just tells us the virtual disk is a collection of 1 or more physical disks from a previously created storage pool. We've already done that. The layout of data across the physical disk can increase the reliability and performance of the virtual disk. I'm just going to click next here. Now it says, what do you want to name the virtual disk? I'm going to name it vdisk01. Now notice this grayed out box, but create storage tiers on this virtual disk. What a storage tier would actually do, if you added a solid state hard drive, which is high performing, and you added a non-solid state hard drive, like a mechanical drive, which is called HDD, a hard disk drive, you now have a mix of media in your pool. Solid state is always faster than these HDD drives. So if you have a mix of both, what would happen when you enable storage tiering, data you access most often would be saved to your solid state. Data that you access less often would automatically be saved to the slower HDD drives. Well, here it says, to use storage tiers, storage pool requires a minimum of 1 automatically allocated physical disk, solid state, and HDD. If all your drives are the same type, if they're all solid state, this is grayed out. If they're all HDD, it's grayed out as well. And all our media are these virtual disks, so they're the same type. So that's grayed out for now. I'll just click next there. Now this enclosure awareness. An enclosure is actually a case is what it really is. You could go to Amazon.com or any of these computer type websites, CDW or any computer site, and you can buy an enclosure. An enclosure is basically a case. You buy it and you put hard drives inside of it. Then you connect it to your server. Some you could even connect directly to the network. The enclosure has its own software built into it, which is actually firmware. And it can manage things like mirroring, redundancy. In the enclosure itself, you just plug your drives into it and have it connected to your server. There is no enclosure detected, so that's grayed out for us as well, because we're using drives that are just directly attached to the server. So I'm just going to click next for that. Now it says, what type of storage layout do you want? This is very similar to what we just looked at with our mirroring equivalent to RAID 1, our parity equivalent to RAID 5, our simple, which is not redundant at all, which is just striping is all that would be. And it even gives us a description of each one. So the simple tells us layout requires at least 1 disk, but it does not protect you from a disk failure. So this is really the equivalent of what we could do with local storage. Now it's just applying to our storage pool. Well, I'm going to click next here. And for the provisioning, it says, do you want thin or fixed? Now, if you choose fixed, what it does is take all of this space when I size my volume, and all of this space is going to be consumed by this disk. If I choose thin, the space that's used will grow as you save into it. For example, I'm going to choose thin right now. And when I click next, it says, what size do you want? I'm going to say 200 gigs. Because I chose thin, when this is done, it's actually going to be a 4 meg virtual disk. But it's going to grow as you save data into it, and it can grow up to 200 gigs in size, but it will never consume more than 200 gigs. If we had chose fixed, the moment you create it, it would actually pull 200 gigs of capacity from that pool, and it would all be allocated to this disk. So you would basically have a bunch of unused white space. It is not recommended that we use fixed because it's not an efficient use of space. So with thin, just think of this as the max size, but it's only as large as what you save into it. We'll just click next, and we're done with that part. So we'll click create. Now you'll see it has this create a volume when this wizard closes. That would just automatically open the next wizard we need. But I'm going to clear that just so we can see where you would actually go. So I'm going to close that. Under my virtual disk here, there is an option for a new volume. So the way this stands right now, this virtual disk 01, think of that like a true hard drive you connected to your server. But you've not partitioned it, you've not created any volumes on it, you just have a 200 gig drive. You don't have drive letters or anything like that assigned. So when I right click, that is where the new volume comes in. So with the new volume, I'm going to click next here, and this is before you begin. That is our server. That's going to be the disk that's created. The size, I'm going to leave it 200 gigs. That is the max size of the disk. Actually, I'm not. I'm going to make it 100 gigs. It's going to be drive letter E. Now, I could choose another drive letter, but I'm going to leave it on drive letter E. Next, we talked about file systems. NTFS, refs are the two file systems that we would actually use. So I could choose either one of those. I'm just going to choose NTFS. And I'm going to click next. That's a summary of everything we defined. And I'll just click create. That is completely done. I'm going to close that. And now I'm going to just open this PC. And the E drive shows up. And you'll see it's really 100 gigs. 99.9 gigs free. If I go back to my computer management, look in disk management, notice the disk 1 and disk 2 don't even show up in the list. When you add the disk to the storage pool, they actually get removed from this interface. The only thing I see now is the disk we just created, which is disk number 3 with that E volume on it. Pretty fascinating. Now, what I can do, I'm going to go back to my storage pool. I'm going to create another volume on this disk. So I'm going to right click new volume. And this is the same wizard we saw before. So we'll go a little quicker. That's my server, my disk. I'm going to make this 100 gigs. That's the space we have remaining. This is going to be the F drive. So I'm going to leave that like it is and click next. And for this, NTFS or the resilient file system refs, well, I'm going to choose refs this time. I mean, it changes nothing. Nothing noticeable will it change, but we'll just click create. And now, well, that's almost done. But when I go back to computer management, you'll see disk 3 shows up here. And I now have the F drive also showing up. So when I click on this PC, there's an E drive and an F drive. So it really behaves truly like a hard drive where I have disk 3 added and I can create volumes on that however I choose, whatever size I want. Now, one more time, if we go back here, I had 250 50 plus gigs of space, but I'm only using 200 gigs here. So what else I can do is create a new disk altogether. So I'm going to create a new virtual disk from pool 1. I'm going to name this vdisk 02. We talked about the enclosure awareness, the storage tearing. So we'll just click past those. Simple mirroring parity. This changes nothing in the actual configuration, just how data would be stored. So here, it really does not matter what you choose configuration-wise. Nothing would be different. Thin or fixed? I'm going to choose thin again because that is just by far the most common. Size? I'm going to make this just 40 gigs. So a small disk. And we'll create. And I'll just close that window. So now vdisk 2 shows up here. I can create a new volume on that disk. If we go next in the new volume wizard, that's our disk, 40 gigs, disk 4. And we'll just make it the full 40 gigs. It's going to be drive letter G. NTFS or refs we could choose. But we'll just click next and we will create. As that's running, if we go back to computer management, you'll see for disk 3, we added the 2 volumes to it. Then for disk 4, I just created a new virtual disk altogether with drive letter G assigned to it. So truly with this storage pool, you could get a bunch of drives, connect all those drives up to your server, then you could create one massive block of space on those drives, and then you can carve it out with volumes, different virtual disks based on whatever your needs actually are. But that would be our storage pool.